We're now joined on SABC News by lawyer and Lady Liberty South Africa founder Nobubele Sam Mkandhla to talk further about the National Disaster Management Centre's decision, or the declaration, in fact, of a national disaster in response to violence against women and children in the country. Good to have your time on the SABC. Let's start with the declaration itself. Mixed feelings from the women we've just been hearing from in our report regarding how much it'll help to turn the tide when it comes to violence against women. Where do you stand?
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a momentous occasion. And like you say, I also have some mixed feelings about the declaration because it's unfortunately taken so many lives and such turmoil and destruction to get to this point. But I think it would also be remiss of us to not acknowledge the fact that we actually are here. And this is a really pivotal moment. If the next steps happen strategically with collaboration, I really think this is a potential turning point to finally seeing all the beautifully written pieces of legislation actually implemented on the ground in a way that changes and saves lives.
Expand on that point for us, what you were saying regarding the need right now for the next steps to be treated strategically and with collaboration. What fashion should that process take?
Absolutely. So that's a great question because I think one key thing to emphasize with this declaration of GBV as a national disaster is that what it's really done is triggered the Disaster Management Act. What this really means is that government is now almost not forced to, but by legislation required to unlock dedicated and additional streams of funding, but importantly to coordinate a multi-departmental response plan, as well as the political will to treat this crisis with the same urgency as any other declaration, for example, COVID or other pandemics, etc. What that really means is that now we await a plan. We await this multi-departmental and coordinated plan. What's key, though, in that is realizing that there are so many organizations, activists, nonprofit organizations, as well as government itself, that has been trying over the years to respond to this crisis in different ways. For example, we have the policing that looks at that initial reporting phase. Then we have the health sectors that look at, for example, collection of, let's say, DNA samples, etc., in the instances of sexual-related crimes. But it goes all the way through to therapists, trauma counselors, lawyers, people that then take these matters to the courts. The courts themselves have been grappling with GBV over the years. What this means now is how best do we bring all resources and ensure that all these efforts are not segmented, but that they are holistic, and we have an implementation plan that tackles each case from inception up to, I suppose, not only arrest of perpetrators, but a recovery plan. What happens post that?
And the classification, as you've just indicated, is quite broad in terms of the different elements that it wants to pull together. They include, for example, policing, social development, justice, health, economic development, and traditional leadership. How do you make sure that in doing that, ultimately this declaration finds expression at grassroots levels, in the communities, in the workplaces, in the churches, and other places where the violence plays out?
You know, GBV is so complex. And as you highlighted, we can't ignore the communities, the churches, etc. We need to start literally behind closed doors within our own homes before we call for government and anyone else to respond. We need to challenge attitudes. We need to also look at social imbalances and address those. But there's also some toxic patriarchal, English at this hour, as well as mindsets and mindsets that need to be tackled. So if I give an example, if a young girl is sexually molested by a relative at home, for example, the issues commence from the family level, where we've had some cases where a grandmother, for example, says, "You are not reporting this." What an absolute embarrassment to the family. What does a minor then do? Who around that child, say the teachers or other responsible guardians, is actually obligated to take this matter forward? Once we get to court, what happens there? So it's really multifaceted, and it's hard to pinpoint the exact measures and the exact actions that need to be taken. But I think the exciting thing about this declaration is that now there is a call that cannot be ignored, that can no longer be ignored, to say, we see the beautiful pieces of legislation. We have the Domestic Violence Act, Criminal Law, Sexual Offences and Related Matters Act, the Protection from Harassment Act. But what does that mean for that little girl who has been molested, whose family is saying nothing's going to happen? How does her case get to be heard? How does she get into a safe space, get some trauma debriefs and therapy and counseling, to the point at which the perpetrator is not only arrested, but her life can find some sort of semblance of normalcy? And this is the point at which I think most activists and role players are waiting for this plan that will integrate all of this.
And Nobubele, accountability also becomes incredibly important, does it not? So that ultimately the people, the implementers, if I can call them that, of this disaster declaration are not just sitting on what is written in black and white, but actually fulfilling its promise to the letter.
Absolutely. In addition to the fact that this declaration has been made on a global stage, there's no hiding now. And this is not to say government hasn't made some strides and some efforts, but now the accountability levels absolutely increase. And in addition to the funds that can be unlocked and released, now there must be a consolidated plan that will be carefully monitored and that they can be questioned against, to say, here, this was the commitment. On this clause or that section, this is what's committed. Our numbers are still showing this. Our cases are still showing this. If this isn't working, let's look at another plan. But the point is, we can no longer look at these pieces of legislation and sort of say, oh, well, they tried. There's an act that says this and there's an act that says that. It's not enough anymore. It's to say, all right, what from that act is being implemented? How are lives practically on the ground changing? And if not, what are you going to do about it? And now there's a greater obligation and greater political will to actually have a plan, have a response that's impactful.
Nobubele Sam Mkandhla, good to talk to you. Lawyer and Lady Liberty South Africa founder, speaking to us on SABC News tonight.